The Radiant Way, Chapter 1. In the cottage. It was a long time before any of us spoke. We walked through the winding pathways of the wood, inhaling the fragrance of the flowers, listening to the music of the birdsong. For a long way a glossy blackbird had been riding on my arm, pecking at me inquisitively, and then looking up with his head on one side. Janet was carrying a dove on her shoulder, answering its cooing little noises she made with her lips. As usual, our angel walked slowly with his graceful stride, his ruby gown flowing around him, a smile curving his mouth. I was thinking of all that we had been taught, and rejoicing that at last I was beginning to understand. The further prospect of meeting our beloved King in one of his many body cloaks filled my heart with a sweet rapture. There was something so satisfying about this woodland walk that even now my mind returns to it. I think my dawning knowledge made me see all things new. I was reminded of the nursery hymn, all things bright and beautiful. Truly, all things seemed ever brighter and more beautiful than before, and looking at my bird passenger and all the glories of nature around me, I delighted to think that the Lord God made them all. "Let us sing it," Janet cried, receiving my thought in a dear way of heaven's realm. So we sang the familiar hymn, our angel joining with us. Not to be outdone, the birds flew down to perch on the lower branches, leaning down to us and singing their own version, as though their little throats would burst. Presently we followed our angel into another pathway which turned off to the left. Here the trees soon began to be spaced out, and there were several clearings or glades which caused me to pause expectantly. However, our guide continued his way, and now we came to lawns with ponds and trees, and to a broad path fringed with mass flower borders. A little way along the path was a small opening cut into the hedge with an archway of the hedging about it. I half expected to see a gate, and then I remembered that a gate would suggest keeping people out, which could not be in this country of universal charity. "This opening is to invite people to come in," said our angel, answering my thought. "People who pass through the wood always turn off to the left at the point we did and come to this opening before proceeding on their way. It is because there is a special welcome for them here." "How do they know?" Janet asked. "Is it because there is somebody sending out thought invitations?" "No, it's because the Lord of Love comes here so frequently. The atmosphere is charged with his divine joy so that it draws people. Few can resist divine joy, you know." "We cannot, anyway," I commented, stealing a glass at Janet. She met my eyes with a joyful look, as though to say, "What glorious adventure is in store for us now?" Strangely enough, as we paused in the opening, I had a fleeting mind glimpse of earth. I suddenly recalled that people were going about their streets, houses and businesses, utterly unaware of the glory of heaven's joy, of the constant adventure that awaited them here. Most of them even dreaded death, imagining themselves, instead of their outermost body cloak, lying under the soil. They spoke of dying with bated breath, or refused to mention it at all the time this home of love awaited them. With the company of friends, the enjoyment of music, walking, gardening, and the constantly changing delights of heaven's realm, it seemed so ludicrous that Janet and I laughed together. Then turning, we followed our angel up the garden path. It was a flagged path, with moss just showing between the stones, and it led between brilliant flower borders to a little door. I do not really know whether the door was small or not, but it was so set about with blossoming bushes, beds of flowers, and slender, drooping trees that it appeared so. It was set wide, revealing the cool shadow of a room within. As we approached, a woman appeared in the doorway. She stood to one side, her robe splashing the brown door with crimson beauty. With a smiling gesture, she invited us in. "I am Carol," she said, bowing to our angel. He quickly introduced us, and then she asked us to be seated. It was the simplest and most attractive room I'd ever seen, long and low, yet abundantly lit, for one wall was entirely taken up with a window whose casement stood wide. Through this window could be seen the splendour of the tiny garden, which was radiant, it seemed, with every colour that had ever glowed. The last rays of the sun slid softly in, flying straight to meet unburnished dishes, like welcoming hands touching each other after a day's party. "And so they do," Carol said in the midst of my thought. "When at the end of the day the sun's rays touch those dishes once again, I know that soon my guests will come." No one asked who Carol's guest could be. By now such wonders did not surprise us, but they lifted our hearts with joy. In silent content, we leaned back into our lounge chairs. The floor was yielding like the floor of our little house in the plain between. How far away it seemed, yet still it awaited our coming, and we knew that our willed thought would take us swiftly when we desired. In the centre of the room was a table, its polished surface reflecting the sunset glow which now spread over the sky beyond the trees. A whisper of wind crept in, bearing its first message of the coming night. No ornament of any kind adorned the walls, but 3 long shelves held the burnished dishes and plates. In the centre of the lowest shelf was a great bowl of fruit and a tall jug of fruit juice. "What does your guest eat?" Janet asked at last. "Or does he perhaps only bless the food?" "He comes here to share my meal each evening," Carol said softly. "You see, when I was on earth, I used to have a favourite Bible story, the walk to Emmaus. Over and over again, after reading it, I would say to myself, they knew him in the breaking of bread. Gradually this came to be for me my idea of heaven, so that after my reparation was done, I came to this place, and he came too. Once, he said to me whilst he sat at the table, and I questioned him in wonder because of his gracious condescension, 'To each I am all.'" "Why, he said that to us too," Janet cried, turning a glowering face to Carol's. They smiled, and then Carol continued, "My guest eats the fruit that I gather from my garden. Some of the grapes I crush and fill the jug with their juice. Then I pick some bread stems. They grow in abundance just beyond the garden path." "No fish or meat?" I asked. "Oh, no." Carol looked surprised. "Are they not the lesser brethren?" "Yes, I understand. The reason I asked was because he ate and prepared fish while on earth. He came to attack sin, not the established customs of people," Carol said slowly. "He spoke of it once, reminding me that he had said on earth, 'I come not to destroy the law, but to fulfill.' It was the same with customs." "Then is it not a custom to eat fish or flesh or fowl here?" Janet put in. "Not anywhere in heaven's realm, I mean." "No," said Carol, looking quite shocked at the idea. "You see, even on earth our Lord said that we must do to others what we would like them to do to us. How much more so here?" "Do you mean that the teaching refers to animals too?" I asked. "Partly, but there is more in it than that. Think how few people there would be who would eat flesh if they had to do the killing themselves. A young lamb gambolling on the hillside beside its mother. Who would willingly plunge a knife into its throat? Who would approach the cattle grazing in the field and one by one see them fall lifeless beside their fellows? Even the hogs would wordlessly appeal against the knife raised to bring them death. Anyone who has not seen the wild ducks in their headlong flight falter and fall to the ground, or has seen a fish plunging madly in an effort to escape the cruel hooks without pang of pity? No, the average man or woman would not do the killing themselves, but they employ somebody else to do it for them." "But if they do not mind," Janet whispered, "or even call it sport?" "They do mind the first time," Carol said firmly. "After the continuous repetition of an act, it loses its horror. Can you imagine what would be the feelings of a parent if a child, on being asked what he had decided to be in the world, said, 'I want to be a slaughterer of animals'? Yet these same people would employ others to do the killing, so they do not do to those others what they would like done to themselves, or to their child." 2. Carol's guest. While we had been talking in this serious strain, the sky had changed its glowing colours to a pearly grey, and twilight began to steal into the room. The scents from the garden came in more strongly too, filling the air with fragrance. Carol rose and silently spread a white cloth over the polished surface of the table, smiling to herself as though she found this a special delight. Then she put the bowl of fruit on the table, with the jug of grape juice beside it, and to our joy set 5 burnished plates at even distances on the snowy cloth. One more dish she took into her hands, and slipping out of the door, went quickly down the path. No one spoke. Our angel was leaning back in his chair with closed eyes. Janet and I sat looking at the table and the 5 plates, wonderingly. Presently there were footsteps on the path, and we exchanged a swift glance. Was it possible that there was another, besides Carol, approaching? We dare not look out of the open door. Our angel, however, arose, so we went to stand beside him. Suddenly we heard Carol's voice, and its reverent bliss set our hearts racing. "Oh, Jesus," she was saying, "I did not expect you so soon, and yet I have waited all day for you." "You have been happy, child?" came the gentle voice. "So happy. People have been coming to the cottage all day to rest and talk of you, and now, Master, there are 3 guests." We would have fallen on our knees, but the angel restrained us, and looking up at last, we saw our beloved standing in the doorway, one arm around Carol's shoulders. He was robed in white, and there was a cream sash passed over his right shoulder and secured at the waist. His face shone with an inner light, and there was so much tenderness in it that my face relaxed into a smile. How I loved him with my eyes as we looked at one another across the little room. Then he disengaged his arm, and holding out both hands to us, said, "Come." I do not know how we got there, but in a moment we were pressed to his breast, Janet and I, while an arm encircled each. Suddenly I was whispering to him, much as I had whispered long ago, when the Great Mother had carried me through the gates into the King's embrace. "Master, Master," and he, as before, murmured, "Son," so that it was a kind of blissful chant. Janet too spoke very low, close to his heart. As always, she was utterly serene and very full of joy. When at last we turned, we found that our dear angel had spread his wings to encircle us, and his face reflected the light that illuminated the Lord's. Carol went past us, then setting the dish of bread stems on the table in a kind of dazed joy, I went up to draw the chairs, the angel helping me. Soon all was ready. Slowly, our beloved took his place at the table, casting a keen glance around to see that we were all comfortably seated. In a breathless hush, we watched him lift up his hands over the food and raise his eyes. As we saw his lips move, all our heads bent low. He murmured a prayer, drawing a quivering breath in the midst of it. We raised our heads to look at him then. Carol silently passed up the plates, and he placed one of the bread stems on each, leaving us to select the fruit we wanted from the bowl. Again Carol went to the shelves. This time she brought small glasses, and the master filled them with the grape juice before passing them to us. "Let us sing a hymn before we eat," he said, rising. Of course we rose too. The master sang line by line, waiting for us to repeat it. He sang of the great Creator who made all things, from the tiny seeds hidden in the soil to the mightiest trees of the forests, from the smallest insect to the greatest of living creatures. When we had finished, he sat down and began to eat. How reverently we looked upon the food that he had blessed and touched. At first we were reluctant to eat it, but he began to eat with such relish, smiling upon us in such a homely way that we were soon at our ease. "Well, Janet, well, Bernard," he said tenderly. We poured it all out, then all our delight in his wonderful heaven and the sweetest joy of all in his dear presence. "Yes, I was with you, even on earth," he reminded us. Though I was no longer visible there, still I remained with the souls of men, sharing their longings, sympathizing with their strivings. "Master," I ventured, "why did you have to go away from your friends on earth so that the Comforter could come?" "How often have you wondered that, my Bernard?" "Well, if those dear ones could see me with their bodily eyes, would they have looked within? No, it is in darkness that men are led to look within. No, it is in the darkness that men are led to look within. There they may seek and find, for there dwells the presence, yes, within each human heart." "And if they look within?" I whispered. "Then the Christ-man begins to grow, so that men come to pattern their lives on mine, to be perfected. It is of this I spoke when I said, 'Be ye perfect,' and of this Paul spoke when he said, 'Until Christ be formed in you.'" Much more our beloved one said to us throughout that wonderful meal. The garden was entirely veiled by the curtain of night, and the stars sparkled through the screen of trees. Yet still we talked on, plying him with questions and listened eagerly to his voice. All the while, Carol sat beside him, stealing adoring glances at his face. Sometimes he turned to smile at her, and then I just knew how much she must have loved him on earth, to have such a wonderful heaven fulfillment here. When the night was far spent, he arose and, beckoning to our angel, drew him to one side. They remained in conversation for a moment. Then our king called us to say farewell, blessing us most tenderly with a hand on the head of each. At the door he waited for Carol, and then they went out together into the night-scented garden. "The Lord desires that we rest here until daybreak," said our angel when we were alone. "Come with me." Silently we followed him, for we were too happy for speech. He led us into one of the little sleeping rooms of the cottage, and we all lay down on the yielding softness of the floor. As with the other room, one wall was taken up with a window which was opened wide. Through this a delicious breeze stole in, laden with many garden scents. We lay gazing up at the sky in its star-jewelled splendour, thinking of the wonders we had seen and heard. Just before I fell asleep, I heard Carol come back. Softly she moved about the room next to ours, singing a little hymn. An early morning walk. Very early the next morning, just as the sun rose to send its first rays through the open casement, our angel awakened us. "Come," he whispered, "we must not tarry, for we must journey at once to the river bank before the sun is high." "Let us first say farewell to Carol," I answered, rising up. "No, she is sleeping. She will understand, for I have left a message with an angel. He will deliver it when she awakes." Janet had stretched her arms above her head, waiting to wake up, as she had always done on earth. Now she too rose and went to the window, drawing deep breaths of the spicy morning air. In a moment we were out of the door, stepping softly through the room where we had taken that wonderful meal the night before. For an instant I knelt before the place he had taken at the table to say a prayer of thanksgiving. Janet had gone at once to the door. I saw that she was reliving that precious time after he had held out his hands to us and said, "Come." Our angel waited for us. Then, when we joined him, quietly closed the cottage door. Together we set off down the garden path. Just as we reached the opening in the hedge, Janet ran on ahead for a moment, returning with 3 bread stems. She gave one to each of us. "Let us eat them in memory of him." Happily we continued on our way. Our angel led us back to the first path we had followed through the wood, and turning again to the left, went even more deeply among the trees. The birds were already awake, alert and playful after their night's rest. They flew all around us, chirping and fluttering. We were so full of joy that we delighted in their play. Janet and I joined with some of them in races, protesting when they cheated by taking shortcuts through the clustering branches. Our angel seemed to be almost covered with feathers, for birds clung to his body and rode jauntily on his arms. Even his wings were not left vacant, for butterflies alighted on them, splashing the snow-white feathers with their brilliant hues. Further along the path we came upon a feathered school. There 2 parent birds were giving their infants a flying lesson. They had them all lined up on the long bough. First one and then the other of the birds would fly down to the ground while the youngsters leant down to watch inquisitively. Then each of the babies was remorselessly pushed off its perch, squawking protestingly. However, they quickly discovered the use of their baby wings and soon were proudly flying up and down and calling to their parents to admire. Presently we came out on the other side of the wood, and now we came upon a moor. Most of the birds left us to return to their woodland home, but some of the larger ones flew on ahead, wheeling triumphantly towards the hills in ever-growing circles. The sun had risen sufficiently to make the air pleasantly warm, yet not too hot for walking on the open moor. With the fresh breeze in our faces, we set off briskly over the heather. Janet was particularly pleased, for she loved bracing conditions. Slender and graceful in her flowing brown robe, crossed with its silver band held in place with the bronze seal, and with the border pattern of the open eye, she swung along, looking at the perfection of health and joy. I strode beside her, a head taller than she, but our angel, who was so very tall, had to adapt his steps to ours, or he would have left us far behind. As we walked, we talked of many things, but most of all we spoke of the freedom and happiness of heaven's realm compared with the little dim earth which people seem to think so good. We had shared this opinion too, of course, while we had been there, but when we thought of all our present joys and our capacity for enjoying them, it seemed that the little world was just a place of shadows, and that here was all the purest light. For eternity also, added our teacher. Angel, Janet said suddenly, can it really be that we will never exhaust our explorations here? That though we spend all eternity, yet we shall never see all the places and use up all the surprises. I smiled then, for I felt sure I knew the angel's answer to that. Of course, he would assure Janet that all eternity would not be long enough, and that she would always find something new or surprising to delight her. Imagine my amazement then, when he said calmly, "Oh, sooner or later he will exhaust them all." I was so puzzled by this that I just gazed at him wordlessly. Janet, too, had half expected the reply I had, and now she also looked at our teacher. "Then what shall we do?" she asked frankly. He laughed then. "Do not imagine you will be idle, children. What I meant was this. As men grow and progress in heaven's realm, they enter into much higher states of vision. Then, beginning all anew, they travel once more over the same ground, but it has an entirely different story to tell them, and another aspect to reveal. Once a man has travelled all over the vast expanse of heaven and has learnt all the lessons it teaches, he comes into a new sight, a deeper awareness and understanding, and a far more extended vision. Then he sets off once more, but on his next journey he sees many things he entirely missed before. Others that seemed to fill his whole world at first are now then only on its fringe. Greater joy, greater glories now set his heart afire with rapture. All is as new and as wonderful and as surprising as though he had never seen it before." "Does that second journey satisfy him for eternity?" I asked. "Oh no," said our teacher, smiling at our ignorance. "It is but the second turn of the spiral ladder of spiritual growth." "How high is it then?" Janet asked in a note of wonder. "It rises up beyond man's knowing, and each turn is a vast span, ranging over all the resources of heaven's realm. Even we angels cannot see its height, and the great beings who sometimes visit us from the high angelic orders tell us that even to their eyes the summit of the spiral is veiled, so that they do not know how much higher it is possible to climb." We were silent for a while, and then Janet said, "Well, I see we shall not have to concern ourselves with finding anything to do, ever." By now we had climbed to the top of a hill, and standing on the highest rock, looked down into the valley spread out below. As far as we could see, it was moorland country. On every side the crags and tors stood darkly against the sky, or rose up out of a couch of heather. The purple sides of the hills delighted our eyes, and we gazed at it all silently. Presently our guide pointed out a faint shining in the far distance. By earth measure it would have been about 50 miles away. "That is the river we must reach before the sun is high." We had little consultation, and then our angel suggested that we should enjoy our walk for a while longer, and then rise and speed over the rest of the way so that we could arrive in time. And this is what we decided to do. In a moment we had started the descent. 4. The little one. When we reached the river, the first sound we heard was that of childish laughter. "Can it be the baby angels?" Janet asked at once, for her mind was never far away from them. "Come and see," our guide invited, leading the way to the bank through a fringe of tall rushes. We halted at the water's edge, looking at the scene smilingly. In the water a number of children were playing, swimming and splashing with each other. In the water, sailing about in little boats, fashioned out of the rushes, were many of the baby angels. Some of them were drifting lazily, but a few had raised and spread their little wings so that they caught the breeze and acted as sail. These were clinging to the sides of their boats and laughing gleefully. "Have these little ones come from the angels' playground?" I asked. "Yes," said our teacher, turning to look at Janet's enraptured face. "Where he is, all the baby angels love to be. Their love for him and their delight in him draws them, wherever they may be. Particularly is this so when he appears in his little body cloak." "Do you mean as a babe?" "Yes, or a young child. Listen." As he spoke, we heard the sound of trumpets, and in the distance saw a group of angels with their instruments raised to their lips. At the very first note, a hush fell upon the children. The baby angels guided the boats to the riverside, and all came to stand upon the firm ground beyond the rushes. Slowly the angels turned, forming 2 ranks. They lowered their trumpets and stood motionless in the reverent way of angels when in the presence of their king. Then down the aisle between them came the little one. He was robed in a short white tunic girded at the waist. He was holding the hand of an old man who walked slowly with the aid of a stick. "I thought all people became young in heaven," I mused aloud. "This man has always thought of himself as old in heaven," our teacher explained. "He used to hire out rowing boats, and he was particularly fond of taking out young boys as passengers. Early in his life he had read the story of St. Christopher, how the man had carried a child across the river and then discovered it was the infant Jesus. All his life he had remembered this, especially when he rowed innocent little lads out on the water. Now, in the fulfillment of his desires, this is his heaven." "Will he always remain old?" Janet asked. "No, he will eventually regain his youth, but so gradually that he will not notice it." Again the trumpet sounded. Then the angels put aside their instruments and came to walk behind their little king. How courteous was the holy child as he matched his steps to those of the old man. They came at last to the riverside, and immediately the baby angels knelt before him, folding their hands and their wings in prayer. Then came the children. They had no wings to fold, but they made up for this by bending low to touch the hem of his robe with their lips. While they paid him homage, the little one, who had disengaged his hand from the old man's, held up 2 of his fingers in blessing, folding the other fingers over with his thumb. His face glowed with the innocence of childhood, but there was an added radiance of purity and joy most beautiful to see. As soon as this little ceremony was over, all the children, angels included, clustered about him. They were perfectly at home with him, taking hold of his hands, pulling at his robes to attract attention, and calling out their items of news excitedly. "Oh, Jesus, we have been swimming in the river. The water was cold." The baby angels couldn't swim because they did not want to get their wings wet. We laughed at them. "And we laughed at you because we made sails out of our wings. You could not do that. Who is the happiest in heaven, Jesus?" He answered then, smiling radiantly in sympathy with their joy, "He who loves the Father most of all." While they talked, the old man had gone to get his boat from among the rushes. He was obviously very proud of it, and he had need to be, for it was beautifully painted, and there was not a spot or a scratch upon its glossy sides. Just as the little ones was about to enter the boat, there was a wide tumult among the heather. He waited, evidently knowing well what it was. Then a host of the lesser brethren appeared, flinging themselves upon him in a rapturous joy. At the same time scores of birds of every size and hue appeared, and clustered about him. Some hovered in the air, others alighted on his hands and his arms and his head. He laughed delightedly, picking up a squirrel in one hand and a kitten in the other, cuddling them against his breast. A puppy gambolled around his feet, yelping madly. A fox sat down to regard him solemnly, and a young bear leant heavily against his side. For a time the little one played with them, singing to them so that they could all join in their very own way. "That is well, be joyful," he cried. "The Father who made you loves you still. He knows the needs of the very least of you. Be kind to one another then, and praise him night and day." It was obvious that they understood him perfectly, and reaching out for the information I knew that he spoke in their own language, also so that men, angels, animals and birds could all follow his words. "Fishes too," our angel murmured, replying to my thought. "You will see that it is so in a little while." Janet and I had been so entranced with this scene that we had almost forgotten ourselves, but now the little one detached himself from the lesser brethren and walked towards the boat. When he reached us, he paused at once, smiling up at us with wide child eyes. "Oh, Jacob," he called, "here are 3 guests. Do let us take them with us in the boat." "Of course, little master," the old man agreed heartily. "Now let me carry you over the water." The little one held up his arms at once. He was about as tall as a child of 5 on earth. The old man waded into the water, carrying his precious burden. Soon he was settled in the boat. Janet, the angel, and I walked over the narrow strip of water eagerly. Jacob climbed in and took a firm grasp of the oars. We were about to seat ourselves beside our angel, who was already in the stern, but the little one made room for us on either side of him. "Now we are ready," he called gaily. Jacob pulled strongly on the oars, and the boat shot out over the water. The children immediately plunged in too, swimming beside us or under us and then bobbing up on the other side, leaping about on the surface or just floating placidly by the bank. The baby angels scrambled gleefully in their rush canoes, and now they all made sails with their wings and paddled with their hands in the water so that they could keep up with us. To our great joy, the little one put his hand in Janet's and one in mine, looking up at us confidently. "Jacob is such a kind man," he said warmly. "On earth he loved all the little boys for my sake, and now the Father has sent him me. What a lovely heaven," Janet said. "Yes, isn't it, for both of us?" He looked across at Jacob with so much affection that my eyes misted. Truly, the loving kindness of the Father was infinite. Presently, Jacob leant on his oars. "Here are your friends, little master," he said. The little one stood up in the boat, then lifting up his hands. "Welcome, my lesser brethren," he cried. "Come and receive the blessing that your Creator sends you." At once there was a surging in the river, and to our astonishment a great multitude of fishes appeared. The big one and the little ones all came up together, their heads visible just out of the water for an instant. As each disappeared, its place was taken by another, and for the time the river foamed as though swept by a gale. "Remember, you live by his power," cried the little one. "Be kind to each other and praise him as well as you are able." When all the fish had disappeared and the surface of the river was again calm, the little one again seated himself between us, taking hold of our hands. This time he did not speak, as Jacob sent the boat swiftly along the river, but the clasp of his little hands were enough for us. From his fingers there seemed to flow a strong current of power which flowed into our hearts and filled us with ecstasy. When at last Jacob pulled the boat towards the bank, we found that most of the babies had fallen asleep among the rushes. "We will not wake them," the little one whispered. "Presently they will gather about me to hear a message I bring from my father. But now, too, I will sleep. Jacob will let me rest against his shoulders. I often do." Silently the old man carried his little master to the dry land, and our angel whispered to us that we must go. When we told the little one, he just stood on tiptoe, reaching up his arms to wind them around our necks. "Goodbye, Janet. Goodbye, Bernard." And he gave us each a holy kiss. 5. Holy Breath. In a moment we had risen into the air and were speeding over the river. By now the sun was high, but it was veiled in clouds so that the cool breeze and the misty sunbeams filled us with zest. For a while we followed the direction of the river, skirting peaceful fields, fringed with hedges and low drooping trees. From the gladness of our heart, Janet began to sing. "My soul doth magnify the Lord, and my spirit hath rejoiced in God my Saviour." And the angel and I immediately joined in, and as we ended our song, we alighted beside a wood and paused to breathe deeply. "Breathing in heaven's realm is almost like eating on earth," I said. "It seems to feed one. Have you noticed it, Angel?" "Not only noticed it, but used it," he replied. "Have you forgotten the Garden of Breath? Of course, that was a very high degree of power," continued the angel. "However, men can recharge themselves with strength or hope or love for God, or almost anything they need, by the conscious act of breathing." "Can they?" Janet asked, marvelling. "How is it, then, that men do not know?" "They do know," our angel smiled. He began to walk slowly into the cool depths of the wood, and we followed him, Janet moving to one side of him and I to the other. "Have you never heard the saying on earth that at some ordeal a man has shown fear? Square your shoulders, take a deep breath and bear it like a man. Does that not prove that men know what breath is?" "What is it then?" I asked. "In that case, courage." "Do they know how to be recharged in other needful things?" Janet put in. "Oh yes, strength, for instance, and resistance to changing temperatures. Watch a man on earth, in your mind's eye, about to lift some great weight. You will see that he first draws a slow, deep breath. He has charged himself with strength. Think of those you knew in the world. The quick, shallow breathers were the ones who were physically weak. The slow, deep breathers were the strong. Now again, with your mental eye, visualize a man about to plunge into an icy pond. He first stands on the edge and fills his lungs with a mighty breath. Remember always that breath is holy." We had penetrated deeply into the wood now. The trees stood like pillars on every hand, their branches interlaced, forming a queer roof. The light was dim as twilight. Through the open window we knew that the sun was high. The ground was carpeted with leaves, old and crisp and brown. Our surroundings, too, seemed to speak of holy things. "Tell us more," I murmured. "Yes, tell us why the breath is holy," added Janet. Well, first we must see it as a gift of God, said our teacher. As the Holy Book proclaims, He giveth to all life and breath and all things. However, it is very much more than that. The act of giving is a holy, intimate act, binding us closely to our Maker. God breathed into man's nostrils and the breath of life, and man became a living soul. So you see that breath is the link by which the life of the Creator enters into man. The holy man, Job, said, "The Spirit of God made me, and the breath of the Almighty gave me life." Again he said, "If man has drawn his spirit and breath unto himself, all flesh shall perish together." By this you see that man exists by the power of the holy breath, that if the Creator withdrew his breath to himself, all would eternally cease to be. If the Almighty breathed in, ceasing to give forth his spirit and breath, man would be no more. Man, by breathing in, draws the life of his Maker and lives. The whole of life is, you understand, a great pulsating rhythm of breath. He paused, and we walked on in silence for a while, Janet and I meditating on his words, coming to understand a little more of their deep meaning. Presently our teacher continued, "This holy breath is more than a gift. It is more than a link which binds the act of giving. It is a power. This power, eternally going forth from God, creates and recreates. Thus, then the channels of waters are seen, and the foundations of the world were discovered at thy rebuke, O Lord, at the blast of the breath of thy nostrils." Again, when Ezekiel brought the dead to life, God said to him, "Prophesy, O Son of Man, and say to the Spirit, Thus saith the Lord God, Come, O breath, from the four winds, and breathe upon these slain, and they shall live." Remember too that the Lord breathed on his disciples, saying, "Receive thee the Holy Ghost." "Do you mean that the Holy Breath and the Holy Spirit are one?" I asked, suddenly understanding the trend of the angel's teaching. "I mean that Holy Breath is the vehicle of the Spirit," he said solemnly. "Men think of breath as a physical act only, but it is more than this. Within the air men breathe there is more of a subtle air, and the souls of men live upon it as the bodies of men live upon earth's air. With the act of physical breathing, the harmony between the physical and the spiritual is restored and maintained, so that at last the in-breathing and out-breathing of both body and soul flow in the rhythm of nature, in the rhythm of the universe itself. Then indeed is man filled with the Spirit of God. Can you see now why you feel that heaven's breath feeds you?" "Yes," we both answered, and once more we fell into a thoughtful silence. 6. The Divine Carpenter. Even the birds seemed to sense our thoughtful mood as we walked on through the wood. They sat motionless on the boughs, watching us, or wheeled above our heads with the faint calls to one another. This was so like a temple too, that perhaps they were calmed by its spell. We had walked a long way before the angel spoke again. "Look," he said, pointing to a spot where the trees were set farther apart. "There is the river again. We are drawing near to Joseph's workshop." Janet and I exchanged a glance at this, and the angel noticed it and added, "No, not that Joseph. He has long since passed on to greater heights. This Joseph is nevertheless a holy man who was, and is, a carpenter." We followed silently as we again approached the river, and we saw at once that there were boats upon it. "These are made by some of Joseph's companions," explained our teacher. "Here it was that Jacob's boat was built." Farther along we came to a clearing where the trees grew close to the water's edge. Here to our surprise, a number of people were sitting. Some of them were talking together, others were evidently deep in thought. There were some angels too, and each of these had a little group of eager listeners gathered about them. "Why are they here?" Janet asked. "All these people wait to consult Joseph. Most of them want something to complete their heaven fulfillment. You have already seen inside of Carol's cottage and the crib. These came to Joseph for what they required." "He must be very happy," I commented. "It looks as though all these people will keep him busy too." "They certainly will." Our angel left us then and went to speak to one of those who were sitting by the river. When he returned, he was smiling. "I have arranged for you to see Joseph immediately, as you do not wish him to make anything. Come along." "How very kind the people are," Janet said gratefully. "All have much sympathy with your guest's material for your book," he explained. They who know the Father's love so well are eager to have it understood by all. Does everyone we visit know that we are going to make a book of heaven's fulfillment? I asked. Yes. The knowledge pours out of you in the form of a light that all can see. It gives them all great joy. We followed a winding pathway among the trees, and presently we came upon a glade where a little building was standing, almost hidden in the flowers that went rioting over it. Before the door was a great log, and along its edge was piled a ridge of curling wood shavings. Our angel held up his fingers to caution us to silence, and then led the way through the little doorway. It seemed very dim at first, so that we looked about keenly. My feet were immediately cautious of sawdust, shifting beneath them like sand, but softer in texture. Then as my eyes accustomed themselves, I saw a bench, well laden with wood and tools, but with a cleared space in the centre. Behind this space a man was standing, holding in his hands a rail of wood and a running of his thumb along it absorbedly. Behind him all tools were hanging on the walls. Then we saw the Master. He was sitting on a bench at the back of the workshop, regarding us with a serene, searching glance. Janet and I approached quickly, falling on our knees at his feet. Immediately, after blessing us, he put his hands on our shoulders, raising us up, making us sit on either side of him. I was reminded of the little one who had sat between us in the boat, and some of the awe I felt left me. After prostrating himself, our angel had walked over to Joseph, and the two were examining a chair which was in course of construction. The Master, we noticed, held a chisel in one hand. His long cream robe had specks of sawdust and a few wood shavings clinging to it. We sat silent, looking at these and thinking of the divine carpenter who had worked with Joseph in Nazareth long ago on earth. I used to think of him too, Joseph said, breaking in on our thoughts. I began very early, when I realized the significance of my name. At this I wanted to ask him a question, but I did not like to speak. The Master, however, understood and nodded to me, so I said, "Was your father a carpenter too?" No, Joseph smiled at this. He was a banker, a very rich and influential banker. Did he mind you being a carpenter? Janet asked in surprise. He minded very much at first. In fact, I do not think he would ever have been reconciled to it. However, after he made me work in his bank for a while, I became ill. The doctor said I must have congenial work in my airy surroundings if I were ever to grow strong. After that he gave in and let me do what I'd wanted to do all the time. There was a workshop near our country home, very like this. An old man worked there, and he was so expert a craftsman that people used to come to him from all the neighbouring towns and ask him to make their furniture. For a long time he and I had been friends, ever since I began to think of the divine carpenter and decided to be a carpenter too. I went to him, and gradually he taught me all he knew. When he died, I continued there as master. Then, after a lifetime of working, of dreaming and thinking, I came here and found my Lord. He turned then towards the Master, and a long look passed between them. "This is my heaven," Joseph said quietly. "Let us show our guests some of your handiwork," said the Master, rising and opening a door behind him. He led us into a long room whose windows all looked out on the peaceful wood. Down the centre of the room were the rows of chairs, tables and furniture of every kind, and I immediately noticed that every one was of a different pattern. "That is because each is the fulfilment of a dream," Joseph explained, answering my thought. "Are these all finished?" "Oh no. The Master and I are not satisfied with them yet. Each must be perfect, you see. Each has some flaw, a tiny splinter perhaps, or a spot that is not so highly polished as the rest. None of them are stained or varnished, I notice. No, for each wood in its natural state is beautiful. It is only shaped and polished. It needs no other adornment than that." His words were proved by the mellow shining of his work, and I agreed heartily. Presently, Janet, who had been looking thoughtful, moved closer to the Master and touched his hand. His fingers closed over hers instantly. He looked down with a tender glance. "What is it, child?" "Master," Janet whispered, looking up radiantly into his face, "did you say that this was your handiwork as well as Joseph's?" "Yes, dear one. Am I not the divine carpenter? He and I work together. How wonderful that must be." Janet's tone was a little wistful. The Master put his arm around her shoulders and led her out of a farther door into the wood. "Little one," I heard him say, You do not know that I am with each one in heaven's realm. Some do not see me at first. Some even mistake me for one of themselves. Then gradually, as they grow and come to know more of their heaven powers, they see me in little flashes of vision. Again they grow, and then they learn to travel to higher planes, so that they may see me ever more clearly, and the light of my power pouring forth. With more growth comes the deep consciousness within, so that they can find me in an instant of time. There comes a time when I am always present with them, heart to heart, face to face. This is heaven, little child, the slow, steady climbing into the knowing and the enjoyment of my presence. I heard no more, as the master led Janet more deeply into the wood. Joseph and I followed slowly. Our angel went down to the river to talk to the people who were waiting there. There was a peaceful gladness singing in my heart. 7. The lesson of the tree. Joseph and I talked together earnestly. I was so much attracted to his simple, wise nature that I asked if I could come visit him again after our book was finished. He consented gladly, telling me of a cottage he and the master had built in the very depths of the wood, where a tiny stream ran softly past the door. We made it for those who find joy among the trees, he explained. You and Janet must stay there. In the cottage the master has helped to build, I asked in awe. It is well that people should use it. Ought not it be kept as a holy place? Joseph looked at me keenly, then evidently wondering how many or how few words he needed to use to make me understand. Then he said, Did not the master wash his disciples' feet? We walked on silently. At first I wondered how this holy incident could be connected with the cottage. Then its meaning dawned. I turned to Joseph with a smile. Service, I said in reverent wonder, from the greatest to the least. Yes, he agreed, and brotherhood. The brotherhood of all and the fatherhood of God and he, the elder brother, as a link between the two, raising us and binding us to the greatest of all. Again we walked on silently. Now and then I caught a glimpse of the master's cream robe and Janet's brown one swinging against it between the trees. Accustomed as I was to mind link with her, I knew that she was in an ecstasy, that she would store in her memory every incident and the smallest word that was uttered, that for all eternity she would draw upon the wisdom she was receiving and drawing, and would also teach me. Sometimes I would catch a glimpse of her joy. It came to me as an impression of light, as though a great sun were shining in the darkness of the wood. My mind drifted back to the cottage and to Joseph's invitation. How kind you are, I said gratefully. Janet and I will surely return and find our heaven there, in the woodland glade. What greater joy could there be? We all think that, Joseph mused, smiling at some tender memory. The master has told me that great as my present joy is, there are much greater joys, that the time will come when he will beckon me, and I shall leave all this to another, and soar upwards to some glory of bliss beyond my knowing now. He tells me, though, that men are never hurried, that all life is one, that men start to live eternal life while still on earth. Our angel has taught us much concerning that, I answered. Most of his teaching is given while we stand at the bench, polishing some pieces of furniture that is otherwise completed, Joseph went on. Polishing is very slow, monotonous work. It cannot be hurried, or it would not have its true gloss. In these times that the master speaks to me of deep mysteries and high truths. When I was on earth, I used to think of him a great deal during the monotonous parts of my work. I used to imagine him beside me, teaching me of his wisdom. He has since told me that he often came to me, and that when called me wise, it was of his wisdom that they drew. He said that he comes to all who desire him, when they are very quiet, when their mind activity is stilled and they are relaxed, humble, undemanding, and at peace. He said these were the 4 essentials of his coming. Where are we going now? I asked after a long silence. We are going to select another tree for our work, Joseph explained. Look, he cried suddenly, the master has made a choice, for there he is. We came upon them then, the Lord and Janet, standing together beneath a great tree. The master had his hand upon its trunk. As we drew near, Janet was saying, Is its life finished, then, when it is cut down? I know, the Lord smiled, turning to look down at her. The tree has its own life which pulses within it, all unseen by the eyes of men. This life is in constant movement, and although the tree cannot be said to be conscious, yet it thrills with its own life and can answer to the touch or the word of its maker. Oh, Janet looked up wonderingly at the great tree. Have you not heard the story of the changing of the water into wine at the wedding feast, or the loaves and fishes? The master looked at her smilingly, for he knew that she both knew and loved those stories. Then he continued. Even when the tree is cut down, its life still continues, both in that which is left behind and that which is taken. When at last it dies, its life flows back to the one life. That is all death is, when men die, too. It is their earth bodies only which are bereft of life. They too return to the one life with all that they have gathered on their earth journey, with all that is enduring. Then in the realm of heaven they live and grow, drawing closer and closer to the all-wise, all-loving one life of the Father. He paused and looked up at the tree again. This great tree will know that I have need of it. It will yield itself without the rebellions which are so often present in the minds of men. Its passing from this living in the forest can be likened to the retirement of men on earth. When their span of work is done, it will rest in greater usefulness, however, helping to fulfill the heaven desires of my little ones. So you see that even the great tree has a part in the Father's plan. Again he paused, putting both his hands on the rough bark. Our angel, coming at that moment into the pathway, quickly stepped up to us. Deepen your sight, he whispered, as you were taught to do in the place of vision. Swiftly we obeyed him, with wonder in our hearts. Great tree, I have need of you, the master said, speaking low as though he shared a secret. You have lived long in the forest, growing from a little seed to this dignity of age. Birds have sheltered in your branches, and little children have played around your trunk. Now that I have need of you, I give you my blessing in the name of your Maker. Leaning closer, he laid his forehead against it and whispered low. Immediately, without a deepened sigh, we saw the sap running upward with a great rapidity, so that for a moment it looked as though the interior of the tree was on fire. From the deepest roots beneath the soil to the highest leaf of all, we saw the pulsating, flaming life flashing and shooting and returning in an endless circle. Where the master's hands rested, the light was the brightest of all. The whole outline of the tree soon shared in the radiance, so that it sent a glowing aura in every direction, lighting up the darkness of the wood. As we watched in breathless wonder, the topmost branches leant over to hover above the Lord's head. Suddenly I was reminded of the legends I had read on earth, of the way in which the trees and the flowers, the water and the rocks had answered to the touch or the word of the Holy Child. At the time I had wondered whether these things could be. Now I remembered and believed, saying over and over in my mind, with God all things are possible. Presently the master removed his hand from the tree trunk and turned again to us. With an infinitely tender gesture he gathered us within the circle of his arms, looking down so lovingly at us that we forgot our surroundings, our angel and Joseph standing by. Do you not think that tree will be glad to yield itself to me? He asked. Learn then, when you think of the wood being fashioned beneath my hands into even greater usefulness, that man should yield to me in just that way. I am the King and the Lord of love. It may seem to them that they will lose something in the yielding, some cherished dream perhaps, or something of the freedom they had come to expect. Then they may even be set aside from the world by infirmity, or hidden from the greater achievements by silent, humble service. Learn then, from the free yielding of this mighty tree, can men not trust themselves to the divine carpenter, to be fashioned into greater usefulness and beauty according to his love and his need of them? As for lost dreams, they have but died and passed into eternity. Men will find them all, and more, in heaven. Children, dear, learn well this lesson, and tell men so. With a final blessing, he withdrew his hands, and turning to Joseph, went slowly down the path with him towards their workshop. We watched him until he was out of sight, and then our angel broke the happy silence. Let us sing a hymn of thanksgiving. As we began, the birds flew down and joined their songs to ours. 8. The Holy House. When our hymn was ended, our angel put his arms about us, holding us to his sides, and then rose sharply into the air. At this, Janet and I knew we were leaving the sphere of dreams and travelling by angel's power. I wanted to make another visit, Janet said wistfully. I intended to ask you to show us the heaven fulfillment of one who has dreamed of being with the Holy Family in the little house in Nazareth. I know, our teacher explained, but this dream cannot be fulfilled in the way you expected. You thought that the fulfillment would be a house with the Lord ever present in the body cloak of a child, watched over by the Mother Mary and the foster father Joseph, did you not? Yes. These great ones have gone far beyond the sphere of dreams. I speak of the mother and father. Think of the divine influences that were brought to bear on them during their years of caring for the Holy Child on earth. A brief contact with the Lord is sufficient to lift up a man's soul to unimaginable heights, to heal all his infirmities and forgive all his sins. Consider the effect on these two who remained in close communion with the Holy One, enclosed in the privacy of their own home, listening to his words, tending him, watching over every hour of his growth. Men do not sufficiently consider this, nor clearly appreciate the holiness of these two, who, even before these wonderful years, were chosen for their purity of heart. Is it any wonder they have passed on to heights beyond your understanding as yet? Janet leaned forward to meet my glance. We were both smiling, for it seemed so foolish now that we could have imagined these two great ones, who had cared for the Holy Child on earth, living out their heaven fulfillment in the sphere of dreams. Of course they would have passed on, long since, beyond all personal desires, into a sphere of higher service to God and man. Could they not fulfill the desires of the devout ones by coming to them in body cloaks? I asked, remembering the lesson I had so recently learned. The mother could, our teacher said solemnly, she who was the tabernacle of divinity, but then the holy Joseph would be absent, and so the family would be incomplete. How then is the dream fulfilled? Janet asked. She spoke so confidently, knowing that in the Father's love's plan there would be fulfillment, that the angel smiled as though well pleased. Can you not guess? Those who have cherished dreams on earth of the holy house of Nazareth are brought together in pairs for their heaven fulfillment. They themselves complete the Holy Family. For each strives to imitate the mother or the father, keeping the little home beautiful and peaceful for the Lord who comes in his body cloak of the little child. Unconsciously they grow more and more advanced in wisdom and holiness until the time when they are called to greater heights. This fulfillment, however, is only possible for those who have begun their heaven life on earth. Do you mean by experience the bliss of heaven in 3 ways? Charity of thought, freedom from care, and dwelling in the divine presence in the heart, I asked. You taught us about that. No, I mean more, in this case. Those who would find their heaven in the holy house must bring the holy house into their lives on earth. How? Janet asked in surprise. Each must make of his heart a holy house, our teacher explained. By this I mean that he must live as purely, as serenely, and as faithfully as though he did indeed have the care of the Holy Child. Think how differently most people on earth would act and speak and think if they could see the divine child ever present, as did Mary and Joseph. Those devout ones who desire this heaven fulfillment must begin to build it on earth. They must live in constant recollection of the Holy One, but is he not present with all? And in constant imitation of the goodness, purity and simplicity of the two who made his home on earth. Thus do they begin their heaven life in the midst of their earth life. We were silent for a long time after this, thinking over our teacher's words and looking around us. As we ascended, the light had grown dim, and now it was quite dark. By this I knew that we were cleaving upwards through the higher void. As the coolness of the atmosphere increased, I took a deep breath, thrilling again with the sense of adventure the void always gave me. Again I thought of my little life on the shadowed globe of earth. So often had I stood with my feet on firm soil and my longing heart amid the stars. Now they began to flash all around us so that the darkness was shot with white, ivory and amber hues. Eagerly I watched for a chariot of angels, and presently had the happiness of seeing one speed past. It was quite a little one, much smaller than I had seen before. When I asked the reason for this, I was told that it was a chariot of cherubs, baby angels, who were bearing into the presence of the King a child from earth who had led a life of such dazzling purity that he had won these glories straight away. What a privilege it must have been to live with him, Janet mused in delight. Yes, and how he delighted in the heart of the Holy Child. The Divine One is even now with him, but as yet the child is sleeping, When he opens his eyes amid the dazzling heights, the first one he will see will be his little king. He rode upon a cherub and did fly, yea, he did fly upon the wings of the wind, Janet quoted, softly adding, "Where are we going, angel?" "As yet you have not seen the heaven fulfilment of those who have lived in constant recollection of the angels. Some there are who, from their earliest days, have walked in spirit with angelic ones. Some have lived in thought communion with their guardian angel, often speaking with him, yet never seeing him, taking on faith the consoling words, 'He shall give his angels charge over thee, to keep thee in all ways. They shall bear thee up in their hands, lest thou dash thy foot against each stone.' Others have dreamed of the great angels of protection who fly over the world with their symbolic weapons in their hands. Some have thought of these angels who are present at every birth, others of the angels of death, or of the messengers who hasten from the very throne of God to assist even his humblest ones. Yes, many are the dreams that have to be fulfilled. Some of them you will see when we reach our destination. It is the sphere of angels." 9. The sphere of angels. For a time we continued our exhilarating journey through the higher void, and then at last we came to the sphere of angels. Here another surprise awaited us. In our journeyings we had become accustomed to the woods and hills, to valleys crossed with streams, to broad rivers through flowing fields. Here the silent dome-shaped nature of the ground reminded us of the mountain-top rim of the Hall of Audience. It was covered with short moss-like grass and seemed to stretch away into an immense distance. There were no trees to break that outline, nor scenery of any kind, except this sloping field with an occasional path across it. One who was unaccustomed to these surroundings would have expected to find it monotonous, but we found that this was not so. Janet and I both felt a sense of the keenest exhilaration. There was a zest, a freshness and a sparkle about the atmosphere that we could not define. "What is it, Angel?" Janet asked. "It is the atmosphere of purity," he answered at once. "This is the cause of the great happiness of angels, for we are eternally pure. The very scenery, or lack of it, is symbolical. The emptiness speaks of the absence of desires. All the varied scenes of heaven's realms spring from the inner desires of men, from their urgent need for change and movement. In a lesser sense, they are all like the constants in the garden of roses, afraid of time without end and nothing to do. As they grow, their desires become higher, less demanding and more purified, but nevertheless the varied scenery around them symbolizes their own desires. Here, where angels invite those who, through long striving, perhaps have come to share their perfect purity, there is no need for the woods, rivers and hills which are the symbols of desire." "Then why are we here?" Janet asked in astonishment. Our teacher laughed deeply. "Are you come to collect material for your book? It would not be fitting if this blissful sphere was left out of it. Thus it is that you are permitted a premature glimpse. But of course you are both far too backward to appreciate the full joy that is shared by all of us here." "Will they mind us being here?" I asked doubtfully. "No, they will regard you as infants, walking with wavering steps among wonders beyond your knowing." "Like the baby visiting the museum?" Janet asked with a chuckle. "I see you remembered my early illustration," our teacher smiled. "Yes, it is very like that. The happy ones here will know you as visitors instantly, because you are not surrounded by that dazzling light of perfect purity which radiates from everyone here." While we spoke together, we had been walking over the grass, though, so great was the distance before us that it seemed we had hardly moved at all. Janet and I stole a glance at each other, smiling. To be told how little and backward we were always gives us an intense joy. It seemed to run through us a delicious thrill, and we always treasured up these sayings and spoke of them together. "Do you know why that is?" our teacher said, answering our thoughts. "You know without questions in your hearts that God is infinite. Thus every reminder fills us with joy because it is also a reminder of all the delights that are still to come. Think of it this way. A child has just begun his summer holiday from school. He awakes to the thrill of his first day of freedom, plans what he will be doing for the golden hours, and proceeds to have a blissful time. At the end of the day, when he comes to his mother's knee to pour out all his adventures, she strokes the tumbled curls, saying, 'Think, my darling, you have 43 more days yet.' You see how happy that would make the child. It is like that with you two. No matter how great your joy, how many glories you have seen, you know that there are more, stretching away beyond your knowing and seeing. No wonder it gives you such happiness to hear how little you are. As he finished speaking, our dear teacher directed our attention to a small group who were passing a short distance away. A little boy who appeared to be about 10 or 11 in earth years was walking in the midst of some angels. One of them held his hand and the others were clustered about him, looking at him with the most tender affection. He wore a robe of the purest white and his whole form was surrounded with a brilliant radiance. He looked more joyful, more beautiful and more pure than any human being I had seen yet. Yes, even than Richard, who had up to that moment been to me my picture of the fulfillment. Our angel, too, looked at him with the tenderest affection. "He is the young boy who passed you in the chariot of cherubs," he explained. "As I told you, he awoke to find himself in the very presence of the king, and so pure was his life that he has come straight from earth." They drew near to us then, and Janet and I instinctively dropped to our knees. The small boy seemed surprised at this, but the angel, who held his hand, showed him how to lift it up in blessing. "How far that little one has travelled in those brief earth years," Janet said, when they had passed on and we were walking again with our angel. "The purity of a child is a wondrous thing," said our angel. "Each childhood year of perfect purity is equal to a score of years later on. There are so many who, after a careless youth, turn to the fight for soul purification, but it is but a few who have lived purely from the first moment of conscious life. Such children are surrounded with many baby angels when they die, and immediately they have left their outermost body cloak, they see their cherubs and gladly submit to the joyful journey to the heights. After they have fallen into a light sleep on the way, for children on earth or in heaven quickly fall asleep, they awake in the presence of the King. Then from that moment they have the freedom of the whole of heaven's realm. They are not barred from anywhere, not even from earth." "Do you mean that they are able to visit those loved ones they have left?" I asked in surprise. "Oh yes, there are no bars to purity. Angels attend them, taking them wherever they wish to go, and always they carry with them the radiance of their blessing. In heaven such children are regarded as kings. Blessed indeed are parents who have lost a little angel child like this." "If there are no bars to purity," Janet said musingly, "what of the few who have lived whole lives of perfect purity, who have grown to maturity on earth and now merit the Virgin's crown? Do these men and women also have the freedom and this joy?" "Yes," our teacher's face glowed. "They are too carried to the heights on the angels' wings and wake in the presence of their king. To them no part of heaven's realm is barred." "Then Richard," I whispered. And all the time we did not understand or know. "Is he—" I broke off and my voice faltered. Our angel searched our faces with a radiant look and then said, "Yes." We walked on for a while in happy silence, thinking how good it would be to meet Richard again, now that we knew so much more about him. Presently we came upon a young girl sitting in the midst of a circle of angels. So much light streamed forth from her and from the angels that at a distance it looked as though one of the day stars of the baby angels had fallen to the ground. As we approached, she looked up, holding out both hands in welcome. "Do come and sit with us, Janet and Bernard. I am Victoria, and these are some of my angel friends." They all smiled at us, making room so that we could sit beside Victoria. She looked radiant, clad in a dazzling robe of purest gold, girded at the waist with a cord of amethyst blue. Her burnished hair, falling about her shoulders, was bound round the forehead with a similar cord, and reminded me of Bernice's angel in the place of artists. She saw that we were somewhat in awe of her, and cried gaily, "Do you wonder why we are talking so seriously? These friends have come to consult me about their charges on earth. I am helping them to see the working of man's mind." "We angels cannot so easily understand men as you who have lived on earth," said one who sat on the other side of me. "When we want help, we come here and we talk over our problems." "Are you all guardian angels?" Janet asked. "Yes, we are the heaven guides. Each man has 2 angels. One remains always with his charge and is called the earth guide. The other acts as a messenger between earth and heaven. She travels to this sphere for advice, or to the hall of audience, perhaps, for a special blessing. Sometimes she takes her charge to the plane between while he sleeps, and conducts him on his tour of reparation after death, while the Earth Guide does the reparation on Earth, I put in. Oh, you know that then? The angel pretended to be surprised. You know they do, Victoria laughed. You can see the exact measure of their progress, and they know that, so it is useless to tease them. Amid the laughter which followed, Janet and I began to feel very much at home. For a while we listened while they all continued to discuss their charges. I was particularly struck with the tender pride which each angel displayed. It was obvious that each one loved her charge devotedly, being quite impervious to disappointment and incurably hopeful. It is because we see their higher selves too, one told me, all they hope to be, and all they will be. 10. The Angel of Birth. Presently, one by one, the guardian angels went away. Each was to return to Earth with precious knowledge which would benefit her charge. When we were alone, Victoria said, "Now I want to introduce you to another angel. Will you come with me?" Eagerly we rose up and began to walk with her across the grass. I noticed that our angel's manner was most deferential, and when I asked why, he said, "We have a great respect for men who have attained to the perfect purity we enjoy. We have it as a gift, but these heroic souls have battled for it through the fires of worldly temptations and through all the growing phases of heaven's realm." Was this one not of perfect purity on earth? I asked, falling into steps beside him. For a moment he looked lovingly at Victoria as she walked with Janet a few paces in front. No, but before she died to earth life she had almost attained, because she has fought with the weeds of sin in the garden of her soul, and has rooted them out remorselessly, turning every thought into a pure thought and every act into a pure act. She is entitled to wear the flower of perfect purity. I did not see it. No. Do you remember when I taught you long ago, each flower blooms in the garden of the Lord, and one day he himself will place it on her breast, when it will bloom eternally? I remember, I cried eagerly. The virgin's crown is for those who have lived in perfect purity. The flower is for those who have tended it in the garden of the soul. If she had almost attained while still on earth, I suppose she came very swiftly to these heights after death. Swiftly, according to heaven's standards, my teacher smiled, but not according to earth's. She has passed through death's door more than 200 years ago, and has but lately arrived here. I was so astonished at this that I had nothing to say, so my angel continued. Do not think she has not enjoyed every moment of this span. She has lived in great bliss, growing almost unconsciously. Time is not of earth here, and passes unnoticed. She would tell you it has been very short. Remember the little shopkeeper who had arrived last Wednesday week, yet his span had been about 80 years of earth time. Recall too what I told you of the little boy. That 1 year of pure childhood is equal to a score of later years. Now I tell you that 1 year of earth striving is equal to 100 beyond death's door. Oh, if men of earth would remember this, to strive now, battling against sin in humility and faithfulness, is to lay up a treasure in heaven so rich that it is beyond their imagining. If they would but use their earth lives, instead of thinking how much joy they can obtain for themselves, how much joy they would find waiting in heaven, and what heights they would quickly reach. The earth life is toil of the digging, but the heaven life is the finding of the buried treasure. After speaking so emphatically, he walked on silently, giving me an opportunity to ponder on all he had said. I did not ask him how men were to know this, for I remembered how he had replied to a similar question. He had pointed out that the Holy Book gave the teaching over and over again, and that it was supplemented by guardian angels, but that often men would neither read nor hear. Presently I noticed a light far above us, moving rapidly, and after watching it draw near, I realized that it was an angel. He alighted short distance from us and began walking over the grass. "Bernard, this is the angel I want you both to meet," Victoria called, and we immediately hastened our steps. As we rejoined them, the angel also arrived, and for a moment I gazed at him in the deepest awe. He was the most radiant angel I had seen up to now, very tall, even taller than our angel guide, with dazzling rays of light pouring out from him, so that they formed an aura of luminous shining in all directions for about 5 feet. His hair was of a copper hue, short and curling about his forehead and ears. His eyes were an intense blue, clear and searching, his skin a golden tan. He wore a shimmering robe of blue, shot with magenta, and his wings were golden. Victoria quickly introduced us. The two angels bowed to each other, smiling. "Do you not know me?" asked the splendid angel, looking into my eyes. "No," I stammered. "In my journeyings to earth I have often instructed you," he said surprisingly. "Sometimes I have given you poems, sometimes gems of wisdom and knowledge." Then I knew why I felt so drawn to him. I went to kneel before him, expressing my heartfelt thanks. Janet, too, was delighted. We all smiled happily as we walked slowly on. "Are you a guardian angel too?" Janet asked. "No, I am one of the angels of birth." "I did not know that there were any," Janet admitted, looking with wonder at the splendid angel. "Have you not heard fairy stories of earth? These often cloak wisdom under legend's veil, or teach of angels by speaking of fairies. You have heard of the fairies who are supposed to attend the birth of a child?" "Yes," Janet and I said together. "The real truth," continued the angel, "is that so marvellous is the mystery of creation that we angels fly to adore at every birth. When the life that is of God enters into the body of anything, whether it be human, animal, fish or fowl, it is a little mystery of creation. What is birth? Who among men could animate the body of anything? Is it any wonder that, when life enters the body of even the tiniest insect, we angels are there to adore, to pay homage to the work of our Creator?" "No, it is no wonder, though I had never thought of it," said Janet, her eyes shining. "Have you ever wondered," the splendid angel went on, "why is it that men are so drawn to little things? People exclaim in pleasure at the sight of a baby, whether it is a child, an elephant, a mouse, or a bird. Even the hardest of heart are softened by the sight of tiny things. Yet mark this, only by living things. A miniature model may take away the praise of men, but it does not inspire that pleasure, that softening of the heart." "Is it the life?" I asked. "Yes, firstly, this is a sign of man's instinctive worship of his Maker. Secondly, it is the drawing power of the angels." "How is that?" Janet was enchanted, for she has always loved little things. "If you held a piece of cloth in the front of a fire, it would become hot. Then if you withdrew it, the heat would remain in the cloth for a time and then gradually fade away. Thus it is with the little people of earth. We angels, who come to adore our Maker at every birth, whether of man, animal, bird, fish or insect, leave a powerful atmosphere of worship and blessing behind us. This is like the heat of the cloth. This atmosphere clings about little people, drawing all men and softening their hearts, and gradually fading out as the small ones grow." "The angels of birth do more than adore," our own teacher put in. "They leave with the lesser brethren the teaching that will guide them through life, and which men call the wonderful instinct of the animal world. Then they leave with the human babies the heavenly gifts which the guardian angels ask for their charges. Babies almost always listen to the words of their guardian angels, and so they preserve the beautiful gifts of heaven. Often, as they grow, they close their ears and gradually they lose the power to hear. Thus it is that so many lose the heavenly gifts that are showered upon them at birth. Wise parents should pray earnestly before a birth, so that many angels will be attracted and will come with their heavenly gifts. Who has not heard a saying, 'A good fairy must have been present at this birth'? Well, that is true of the matter." After a little silence, Janet asked, "Why are you here? Is it to meet and teach us?" "Partly," said the splendid angel, "but my chief mission is to gather many angels of birth together, and many valuable gifts, perseverance, sincerity, charity, and the like. A mother has been praying for her unborn child, consecrating the child and herself to the Father. Because of this, a great host will be present at the birth, laden with blessing flowers and many gifts." "Have you just come from a birth?" I asked, in eager to detain him for a while, but he was about to leave us. "Yes," he answered, his voice dropping to a tender note. "A baby monkey has just been born in the depths of a forest, and a bird has newly broken the blue shell of its egg. On both those occasions, I was present to adore our Maker." He lifted up his hands to bless us, and then sped off on his mission. 11. The Angel of Death. "Now we will continue our way, for I want you to meet another angel," Victoria said. This time we all walked together, and again I was struck by the featureless landscapes, for there was nothing in it to register our progress. It reminded me of what it symbolises, the lack of desires, and so I moved closer to Victoria and asked, "If you have no desires, however high, of a personal nature, can it really be that you are happy?" Victoria laughed then. "Now, Angel," she cried, twinkling at him, "are you not surprised that these two, who have come so far, should still think happiness is finally achieved by the fulfillment of personal desires?" "Well, you know," the angel said gravely, pretending to ignore us, "they are backward as yet. See what you can do to make them see reason." Janet and I exchanged a delighted smile at this, and Victoria said, "It is a sign of immaturity to think that one can only be happy if receiving something, or hears something, or is otherwise entertained. We in the sphere of angels find all our happiness in being, not doing." "Do tell us," Janet begged. "Well, the apostle spoke of it. When teaching his friends about God, he said, 'In whom we live and move and have our being.' You do not think of the great Father having to do things to keep his eternal happiness, do you? He dwells in high bliss through the virtue of his own essence. Leaving our personal desires, we enter into this bliss with him. Do you understand?" "A little," I answered, "but not very well." "That is because you are finite and he is infinite. That is the very foundation of our bliss, that we finite creatures, so dependent upon him, so helpless and weak alone, are able to enter into his infinite power and strength and joy. We cannot enclose this happiness, see it wholly, or even understand it. We just immerse ourselves in it and live in it, drawing from all his tender, loving attributes without an instant's separation or pause." "Do you mean that you are there now?" Janet asked in awe. "Oh, yes," Victoria answered, and as she spoke these words, the light shining forth from her increased to a brilliant glow. "Let me try to make it clear. Visualize a park on earth, and then in the midst of it a house, and in the midst of the house a room. One who was with me in that room might be surprised if I said, 'I am in a house,' or would be more astonished still if I said, 'I am in a park.' Seeing no further than that one room, he would be unable to understand more than the four walls with his power of sight. Now when I say I am even now immersed in the bliss and the power and the strength and the love of God, you are surprised, for you think you see me in the sphere of angels, and so I am." "Oh, it's becoming clear," I cried, and Janet nodded, her eyes misty with their glowing inward vision. "Think of a newborn babe of earth," Victoria continued, smiling. "Its whole world is contained in the circle of its mother's arms, and though the mother may carry it from place to place, yet it has no separation from its home in the maternal embrace. It even draws its nourishment from her breast. This, to a certain extent, describes the life of those who live and move and have their being in God. Only unconsciousness of surroundings is replaced by consciousness." "No wonder you are happy," I breathed. "You do not think we pass our time without movement or action? The Father himself is in constant action in the sense that he constantly breathes out his spirit into creation, supporting, feeding, renewing and restoring all things. Our action is in and for him. Our desires are merged in and united with his. As an arm, a foot, or a finger moves in response to the will of a man, yet each retains its individuality and own sphere of usefulness. So do we move at his behest, and thus it is that we live in the bliss of the love of God." As Victoria finished speaking, the aura of light around her grew into such a blazing radiance that our eyes were dazzled. We paused in our walk and drew close to this happy one, experienced something of her joy in the darting fires that touched us. When the light had faded a little, we heard a footstep on the grass, and turning, saw another angel approaching us. She was nearly so tall as the angel of birth, in fact, shorter than our angel guide. Her hair and colouring were very fair, the long tresses falling about her arms and shoulders. Her robe was of a soft grey, and her wings the colour of paper that is tinted with age. There was a gentleness and a tenderness about her that drew us instantly. She reminded me of the cool, sweet tones of an autumn evening on earth. "Victoria, Janet, Bernard," she greeted us softly, and her voice was as musical as a tiny silver bell. Our angel bowed deeply to her, and they exchanged a smile. Then turning to us, he explained, "This is one of the angels of death." I was very surprised at this. If I had tried to visualize such an angel, I should have thought of one of tall and darkly powerful. She must have been receiving my thought, for she said, "When men reach the evening of their days, or come to death's door unexpectedly in the morning of a life's day, they need the tenderness and rest which we can give." "I am sure they do," Janet answered. When I died to earth life, I remember the sense of peace I felt, but I did not know why until now. We are rarely seen by earth people, the angel of death explained, for their fears cause such a tumult, or if they have no fears, their friends have. Sometimes there is rebellion too, or noisy mourning around the dying one. How this can be, when men have heard that God is very love, we angels never know. Often we talk of it together, but it is a mystery that we can never solve. Even when the passing is quite peaceful, we angels are not often seen until the soul has entirely shed the body cloak. But oh, the joy and relief we witness on the other side of the door. Men are such little people, she continued tenderly. When we enclose them in our loving embrace, soothing away all their frights or fears, they often exclaim in wonder, saying, "Can death be as sweet as this?" Then we say to them, "Have you forgotten that God is love?" As she had spoken, I had been seeking into my memory for something, and now I had it. "But what of Hubert and Anna?" I asked urgently. "I was sent to meet both of these in the hall of reception, and each was rebellious and fearful even then." "You were sent because they would have been afraid of angels, do you remember that? Each had seen us beyond death's door, but we had been spurned by them. Have you not seen a child timidly fly from a loving adult because he was a stranger? It is often like this with us." "Does it grieve you?" Janet asked sympathetically. "Only for their sakes," the angel explained. "It is the same just before death. Their fears or rebellion shut us out, just as noise shuts out soft music." "What do you do then?" I asked. "We pray," said the angel of death simply. "Then the Father sends other angels who may be passing near, and they gather around us to offer their services. Sometimes the combined power brings peace and joy at the last, and prepares the way for the journey on angels' power when the earth body is left behind. At other times the angels speed off to heaven to contact the friends or relatives who are there and bring them to the hall of reception. Have you not heard of people who, in the act of dying, have cried aloud the name of a loved one gone before? Our work, you see, is comprehensive." "And wonderful," I put in fervently. "Thank you for telling us about your tender love," Janet whispered. "It is but the reflection of the Father's love," she explained, smiling. "We are so happy, for it is such a privilege to bring the wanderers home, and the lambs to the fold of the Good Shepherd. Now I must hurry away. There is one who is soon to pass into eternal life. Such a good, earnest soul, yet timid. She will not close her ears, however, to the music of our love." For a moment more the angel of death remained to bless us, and then rose to wing her way to earth. 12. The Angels of Prayer. "How gentle is the angel of death," Victoria said softly as we continued our walk. "I had to ensure that you put that in your book." "It's very good of you to be so interested," I began, but she broke in laughingly. "We love to spread the good news of the Father's love among men. This is the gospel of heaven, I think." "Are there any more angels to see?" Janet asked. Victoria linked her arm in Janet's, exclaiming, "There are so many that you could never exhaust them. However, I want you to meet a few more." "As there is no scenery here, except that which remains the same," I said, "why is it that we walk over grass instead of remaining where we are?" "Partly because you are still accustomed to travel and movement, but partly because this grassy plain runs through the middle and what is called the Radiant Way." "Where does it lead?" "To the throne of God. Do not think by this," Victoria added, "that this is the place of the eternal throne and that there is no other. I mean that as one continues this radiant way, one's consciousness is deepened so that at the end one comes into closer union with the Father. I am on this way for the first time, so that in pausing to conduct you into the presence of various angels, I am but resting on my road. Those angels whom you have met and will meet have passed this way many times. Look," she exclaimed suddenly, "here are 4 you have already known." Coming towards us were our angel guides, those who had guarded us on earth and guided us at the very beginning of our heaven journey. We cried out in pleasure at this. Janet went to welcome her guides, and I to mine, while Victoria walked behind with our angel of the ruby gown. What a joy it gave me to see them again. It brought back to me so vividly my first awakening in heaven, when I had opened my eyes to behold these 2 leaning against a trellis of vines. They were smiling too. They held out their hands to me, and then clasped me on the shoulder. Janet, I saw, was happily talking to her guides, and presently we all walked on. Janet with her angels, I with mine, and Victoria and the angel guide following in the rear. "Did you know we were to meet?" I asked. "I had no idea." "That is because you were meeting so many angels and learning so many things. Oh, Bernard," said my heaven guide, "what a lot you have learned since you gazed round the hall of reception saying, 'So this is heaven, is there more to come?'" We laughed at the memory, and then I said soberly, "How far have I travelled too since you showed me the stains on my mystic robe and taught me how to make reparation to others for my sins against them?" "Yet what a happy time your term of reparation was," said the earth guide. "For men to take advantage of the holy sacrifice of the Saviour is sweet indeed." I noticed that my angels' robes were no longer white, but a clear green, so I asked, "Are you still guardian angels?" "Oh no, we have been raised to the order of prayer." "What do you do?" I queried, smiling at their evident joy. "We travel over the earth listening for prayers. When we hear one that is selfless and worthy, we return to the Father's throne. Here we receive the necessary wisdom and knowledge to deal with it. Then we speed off to contact the angel who is needed for its fulfillment, give all the details, and send him with the answers." "I notice you said that you listen for selfless prayers. Do you not seek for answers to others then?" "Not the selfish, cruel, or greedy prayers. Often it is the loving kindness of the Father which protects men in not answering such prayers. Evil has a way of returning to its source, you see, and harming the one who prays for it. In the world there is much hatred and evil, and many there who pray amiss. Do recall the words of the Apostle, 'Ye lust and have not, ye kill and desire to have, and cannot obtain. Ye fight and war, yet ye have not, because ye ask not. Ye ask and receive not, because ye ask amiss.' The angels of prayer, enclosing their ears at those times, are not hard of heart in loving kindness. They save men from many evils." "Where are you going now?" I asked. "A little girl has prayed for a doll. We go to ensure its answer." "Is not that a selfish prayer?" I asked in astonishment. "Oh no," one of them said. "It is neither selfish nor greedy, for the child has no toy of any kind. Her prayer was prompted by trust in the Lord's love. She has just seen a picture of the Nativity, and in the trustful simplicity of her heart she prayed, 'Baby Jesus, if you would like me to have a dolly, I would so like one, but I know that you know best.' Can you imagine how this warmed our hearts? Very soon an angel will be speeding to whisper in the ear of the guardian angel of earth. That guardian will inspire his charge to give the child a doll, and so the prayer will be answered." "How happy you must be," I said. "We are," they answered with glowing eyes. "Are Janet's guardian angels angels of prayer too?" I asked, noticing their green robes. "Yes, let us overtake them and hear what they have to say." We hastened our steps, and soon I had the happiness of meeting those two who had cared for Janet so well since her birth. She too found joy in talking to my guides, and we all continued in a group until Victoria arrived with the ruby angel. "Do tell us what your mission is," I begged Janet's earth guide. "It's a very important one," he explained, sitting down on the grass and inviting us with a gesture to do the same. "Of course we think every prayer mission is important," the heaven guide smiled, "but this one particularly so." She glanced at her companion. "Now I will be silent while you tell them." "There is a young lad on earth," began the angel, "who is destined for greatness. His father and mother had for many years desired a child, and at last, while praying in the church, an angel appeared to the woman. She was one of the angels of conception who attended the Great Mother, but of course the woman did not know that. All she saw, and that not with bodily but with inward sight, a great luminous shining, and in the midst the misty outline of an angel. At the same time the angelic messenger pressed upon her mind the knowledge that she would have a child at last, provided she and her husband dedicated him before his birth to the service of the Father. In ecstasy she agreed at once, and the angel said his name must be Alexander, which meant helper of men, because in giving his life to the service of God he would also give it to humanity. Of course the woman hurried to her husband with the joyful news. He, being a simple and devout man, had no doubts of the reality of the vision. He at once returned with her to the church where, kneeling before the altar, they made the required vow. Now at that moment the guardian angels of the pair had gathered about them so many companions, so that the church was filled with a host of angels. In due course the boy was born, and of course at his birth the same angelic hosts were present. The angels of birth poured forth their worship of the Maker, together with many gifts. All the others resolved to visit the child from time to time to see if there was any service they could render him. Sometimes earth people were able to catch a glimpse of their shining, and they would exclaim at the radiance which appeared to surround the babe. As he grew and reached his first year, it was noticed that animals and birds had no fear of him. They would flock around him as he lay sleeping in the garden. When the day was hot, birds would gently flutter their wings to fan him, and a great dog lay beside him to give him a shadow from the sun. Then when the boy had reached 10 years, it seemed that a calamity had befallen him. How often men of earth mistake the workings of the divine plan for sorrow. His mother died. Now what happens was this. The boy had reached the stage when he had to go forth into the world alone. At least it would seem to the boy that he was alone. But actually he was to have the continual guidance and blessing of his mother, something that he could not have had while she was on earth, for inevitably circumstances could have parted them during his education. His mother, one of the pure ones whose flower grows in the garden of the Lord, had been taken immediately to this sphere, had wakened in the presence of the king, and had then learned of her privileged mission. She was to have the freedom of the earth and heaven, watching over her lad and seeking all the angelic help he needed. At first the father was inconsolable, and for a time his grief drowned the whispered instructions of his guardian angel. At last, however, he came to understand. Now he is sending the boy to boarding school. The angel fell silent, musing, so at last I asked, "What is your particular mission then?" "Alexander has come upon his testing time," he continued. "Now all the forces of evil will conspire to bring about his downfall, for he will hear of and see the dark shadows of sin. We go now to gather about us the great angels of protection, to conduct them to the boy. There they will remain until his need of them is less." "Then he will be certain to be safe," Janet said happily. "No," said the angel. "That is where man's own free will comes in. Every help will be given him, all instructions whispered in his heart, and blessings will be abundantly showered upon him. But the final choice between good and evil rests with the man himself. Never forget that. Alexander holds his own destiny in his hands." "We will pray too," I promised when I saw that the story was told. "Yes, do that," agreed the angel of prayer. 13. On the Radiant Way. When we had wished our guides a temporary farewell, for they told us that we should often meet, Victoria led us on over the Radiant Way. Happy as I was to be with her, I yet felt an inward hunger which at first I could not define. Janet too said she shared in this, and after we had spoken of it for a little, when Victoria walked ahead with the baby ruby angel, we came to the knowledge of it. It was for the visible presence of our beloved. So often had we been privileged to see him in the sphere of dreams, that even the Radiant Way seemed empty without him. "Let us ask them if we shall see him soon," Janet suggested. We hastened our steps then to overtake them and eagerly put our question. "This is the sphere of angels," Victoria said gently. "Men who are permitted to come here cannot share in the fullness of their joy until they have reached the end of the Radiant Way." "Do you remember what the scriptures say concerning angels?" our ruby angel put in. "I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven." Think of the bliss these beings whom you see, indeed all of us, share in it. And since the Lord himself said, "I and the Father are one," to behold the face of the Father is to behold him also. "Then we shall not see him in this sphere?" Janet said wistfully. "No," Victoria said, "but a great joy is in store for you later on, is it not, Angel?" "Oh, what is it?" I demanded. "Do tell us." But Victoria and our teacher, smiling, firmly drew their mental vows, and we had to be content to wait. There was no hardship in this, however, for our way now led us through the paths of many angels, so that we were able to speak to some and behold others from afar. We were so busy using our extended sight and asking questions that for the time we had no thought for anything besides. The first angelic being we saw looked like the pillar of fire, of which we had read while on earth. It came so suddenly before our eyes that we were quite dazzled, and Victoria said, "A company of angels of protection has alighted nearby. Wait, cover your eyes, for I see they are about to disperse. When there is only one remaining, I will tell you." So Janet and I remained with our hands over our faces, but even so the radiance shone through like a golden glory. Presently Victoria said we could look up, and even though there was now only one angel, the light was of a great intensity. When we had become accustomed to this, we saw that the angel of protection was very tall and powerfully built. His hair and eyes were dark, his skin tanned, his robe of a vivid flame colour, and his wings, in startling contrast, were white. From his whole outline of rays golden flame poured forth, so that he looked as though he stood within a circle of fire. His appearance was splendid, but somehow terrible too, and our angel whispered that where he is, the dark spirits cower sullenly or even flee in terror from before his face. He did not speak to us, but looked for a moment deep into our eyes. Meeting his flashing glance, I felt a sense of comfort as well as of awe. It seemed to us good that such mighty ones were available to fight our battles with the evil powers on earth. Again, however, we were reminded of man's own choice in its destiny, for our teacher said, "The angels of protection come only to those who pray sincerely, deliver us from evil. In their hearts, you see, they are already opposed to evil. It is not enough to think they would like to be opposed to it, and then to give way when temptation comes. They must fight valiantly with heart and mind and will. Then, if they hold steadfastly in temptation, the angels of protection will come to them and will vanquish the dark powers." In another moment, the angel had risen into the air and was soon out of sight, but almost immediately we saw a group who were robed in gold and brown. The newcomers were most handsome and reminded one of the Greeks of earth. Their skins were pale, their calm eyes brown. They paused to speak with us, saying that they were the angels of justice. These beings were present at meetings and disputes. They waited patiently at such times, and when they saw a mind attuned to them, poured the blessing of this virtue into human hearts. "Many a times we have averted grave injustice," one said. "Even if there is one just man among a multitude, we are able, by strengthening and supporting him, to work great benefit to all, for such a man becomes instantly a leader of his fellows. They, even he, wonder at his power, but we know." Presently we saw two angels walking together in earnest conversation. We did not disturb them, though they turned to us and smiled. Victoria said that they were angels of holy charity, and that they held a store of loving kindness to pour into the hearts of those who were ready for it. These two were rather small or slight, and were robed in sky blue. Their wings, we noticed, were light and feathery, and we were told that this was a symbol of tenderness. The next angels we saw were very similar to these, but their colouring was silver. Victoria said these were the angels of mercy, and that this was the virtue in their great eternal gift to men. Later we saw an angel whose gown was of sunshine yellow. She also was small and slight, but she had short golden hair and wide, calm blue eyes. "I am an angel of wisdom," she said, coming to meet us graciously. "Men who love wisdom draw us mostly powerfully, and when their minds are relaxed and receptive to us, we teach them many truths. We often watch beside them while they sleep too, especially if they have an important problem to solve." When she had left us, I turned to our ruby angel in great astonishment. I had no idea there were so many kinds of angels, or that they were so concerned with men. "Why, they live for the service of God," he exclaimed, smiling. "How could they truly serve him except by serving his children? Our men are so precious in the Father's sight. He who created them loves them so deeply that even we angels cannot sound the depths of it. He who created them gave them the greatest gift of all, that of free will. And so, while he watches over them and sends his angels to help, teach, strengthen and protect them, he does not forcibly intervene in their lives. Sometimes they think he does not care or know, foolish little people. Yet all the time we angels live to act as messengers between himself and men. Above all men we know his loving care, for we spend all our eternity in travelling from his throne to the throne of human hearts. It is his will, that is enough for us. But we, who behold his face and know a little of his glory, understand his condescension also." He was silent for a while, and we pondered on his words. Then Victoria said, "What would you think of a king of earth who caused his sons, his closest friends, and all his majestic court to spend the rest of their lives in caring for the beggars of the land, in personal service? Would you not think him a great king? Would you not marvel at his mercy? Most of all, we would not see his sons, his friends, and all the members of his court wonder at the depth of his charity? Thus do we, and the angels, marvel at the loving kindness of God. Oh, if all men knew of the service of the angels, Janet cried eagerly. All men know of the love of God, our teacher said gently, and we are not greater than our Maker. Is it any better to know that the Father sends his love through angel messengers at times? No, for it is all one, love. Soon after this we bade farewell to Victoria and watched her continuing her journey along the radiant way. Now, said our angel, we must start on our journey. 14. The Virgin's Crown. We talked with our angel for a long time as we went wheeling rapidly on our way. He seemed particularly anxious to answer all our questions, encouraging us to range in thought over the whole of our tour and to remember all the lessons we had learnt. Then he taught us more about each one, even looking with his angel sight into the vast distances, as well as the nearby plains, giving some news of those we had met. The little shopkeeper, he said, was just beginning to awake, to have vague hungers for a higher state of living. Frank had made great progress and was soon to be shown his angel guise, for he did not think any longer that no one ever wished to see an angel. Constance had lost all fear of eternity and was still completely happy with her music, with Margaret meeting and teaching her from time to time. Bernice had perfected her dance and already begun her part in the greatest play of all. As for those in the sphere of dreams, these were all mostly wonderfully happy, and all unconsciously were learning and growing rapidly. Hearing all these interesting things, we were scarcely conscious of our journey, but presently I began to wonder again about our destination. Janet too cast questioning glances at our teacher, but at first he pretended to ignore them. When, however, we caught sight of a vast range of mountains, he could keep the secret no longer. Yes, he smiled, it is the mountain of worship, or the hall of audience as it is known among men. You are to see a youth receive the Virgin's crown. At this news, a great thrill ran through us. Janet clasped my hand, and in this joyful mood we alighted onto the high plateau. What a thrill it gave us, too, to look around in every direction and see nothing but mountains, to breathe the rare, vital air, to stand within the moist caress of the clouds that swirled about us. Once more we noticed the dark shape of the plateau, and saw angels coming up over the rim. When will it be? Janet asked in a breathless whisper. Almost any time now, our angel said, and even as he spoke the trumpets began to sound and a multitude of angels hastened to join the few who were already beside us. Soon the whole plateau was crowded with the angelic beings, and as all the orders wore their own colours, and their wings too were variously tinted, the colourful spectacle was breathtaking in its beauty. Still the trumpets sounded, and presently there was a sense of mighty movement in the air as though a strong wind blew, and then a wondrous fragrance stole upon us. At once we knew the Great Mother was coming, and that the movement came from the wings of her attendants and the fragrance from the flowers they carried to honour her. All the angels had fallen on their knees, and we did likewise, fixing our gaze upon the rim before us, from which the great light blazed. "Shall we see her?" I whispered to our angel. "Yes," he answered, with an exultant ring in his voice. "The Great Mother now appears in her greatest body cloak. The King, too, appears in wondrous splendour because of the solemnity of this occasion. Look." As he spoke, the trumpets rang out even more triumphantly, and over the rim came a mighty procession, headed by many little angels, scattering blossoms on the ground. After them came the trumpeters, and then a great choir with countless instruments of beauty and power. Behind these came a long line of singers, pouring out their joy in a heavenly psalm. "She comes," whispered the ruby angel. There was a great throne carried by many angels and massed with flowers of every kind and hue, so that it was impossible to see of what it was composed. Great rays of light flashed out and blazed from it, and in the midst sat a majestic figure, wearing a crown set with many stars. Over her head there appeared a great globe, like the world, held aloft by the hands of angels, and on this globe appeared the words, "The Mother of Creation." "What does it mean?" I heard Janet ask in an awed whisper, and our teacher's tender reply, "Not now. One day you will understand." When the throne had reached the centre of the plateau, the angels set it down, and still the mighty procession advanced. Behind the throne there came more child angels, also scattering flowers. Then followed long ranks of youths and young girls, walking two by two. They were all robed in white. And I asked, "Have these received the Virgin's crown?" "No," said our angel, "but they are to receive the flower later on. They are here to pay homage to their companion, Anthony, who now receives the crown." "Where is he?" Janet asked. "There." We followed the angel's glance, and now we saw that the centre of the ranks was broken by a single figure. He seemed about 20 in years, fair of face, with thoughtful dark eyes and very dark hair waving back from a wide forehead. His hands were set palm to palm, and reminded us of Richard's when we had seen him receive the first star. "How beautiful he is," Janet breathed. "He looks as though he had never known sin or pain or sorrow." "He has known all three and more," our angel said gravely. "His short life was lived in a slum, and most of that in one foul room, for early in his childhood he had an accident which crippled him." "Yet he remained pure in thought and word and deed," I said wonderingly. "How wonderful that is." "Can you see now why these holy ones fill us with such joy?" our angel said, "and why it is that we do them homage? To have lived and conquered, how it pleased the king." "Where is he?" Janet whispered eagerly. Our angel paused a moment and then again cried, "Look!" How the trumpets rang out as he appeared. The singing and the music stopped. Then the ranks of angels and men turned about to face him. The Great Mother rose from the throne and prostrated herself before him. All was in utter stillness until he spoke. "My children." Our eyes filled with tears at the tenderness of his tones. We all raised our eyes to gaze at him, at the splendid, glowing, divine being who was our Lord and King. "Receive the Father's blessing." He made a great sign of the cross over our heads, and the sign did not pass, but remained a glowing symbol of his sacrificial love before us all. I reached out and grasped Janet's hand while we looked with awe at the glowing sign. Once more, as on so many occasions in the past, his eyes seemed to meet the eyes of each one. Each one of us felt as though our King was present for him alone, so intimate and sweet and personal was his communion with each heart. For a long time, it seemed, he continued to pour the torrents of his love upon us. Then, at a gesture from him, the Great Mother arose and went to the place where Anthony was kneeling. Tenderly she raised him and wrapped about him with her robe, which was the colour of the dazzling sky above us. She brought him to the Lord. The boy would have fallen on his knees again, but the Master received him into his embrace, holding him against his breast so that he faced us and the Great Mother too. Then she lifted up a gleaming crown and placed it upon the boy's head. Immediately he was surrounded with a great light, and when it faded a little, we saw that his white robe had changed to flashing rainbow hues. How the music ran forth then! The trumpets began, and then all the instruments joined in, with the singers high above them all. We all rose and joined the great procession, which filed past the king. There he stood, our dearly beloved, with the Great Mother on his left and the newly crowned one between them. He looked radiant, yet with a modesty and a calm that one would expect from a wearer of the Virgin's crown. Despite the solemnity of this time and the vast multitudes that were there, we all felt most wonderfully at ease. Was not our King with us? Joyfully we sang with the angels, and when our turn came to pass him, how our hearts beat in rapture because of the love light in his eyes. Once more Janet turned to press my hand, and our angel, leaning close, whispered, "Now you truly know that heaven is fulfillment."